This is the environmental methods section, and we've scheduled 50 minutes for that. We're maybe going to shave a little bit of time there. We are going to try to do a lot of things. And first thing is to clarify that this is not a nutrient tracking tool and a Comet Farm tool training. This is a training on how to use those two tools in an innovative way to do retrospective analysis, right? So we've been emphasizing these are already all soil health successful farmers. Let me say that again. These are already soil health successful farmers that we've chosen to analyze. And the nutrient tracking tool and Comet Farm tool are what if predictive tools. And so we used it in a little bit of a different manner. And so this is what we're going to be training you to do today. So I'll spend a little bit of time running you through the tools so that you're familiar with them enough for you to hopefully be able to understand what we did with the tools. We had to create our own questionnaire to manage both questions for both tools. And I'll run you through those. And then I'm going to show you how you can tweak the questionnaire to work for you and modify it for your county and your crops. And then show you how to analyze the Comet information in Excel, which is a new feature of the Comet tool, which we really liked. And hopefully you may consider doing it too. So here is the home page of the nutrient tracking tool, just to lay the land here. And these are all going to be screenshots. I'm not going to be able to show you or walk you through the actual tools. But you can see at the bottom, there's presentations and the what's new button and about NTT, a documentation tab, and an FAQ tab. So tons of resources already available on this site. Here for your reference later is the actual website. And on all of those little sections that I showed you, there's a 2-minute video, there's a 15-minute video, you can download the user manual, and of course there's that frequently asked questions page. Want to give a big shout out to Mindy Selman, who is the point person for USDA on nutrient tracking tool, and over the years has been a close partner to Dr. Ali Saleh of Tarleton State University, who is the primary developer, the academic partner for USDA that has been building out and developing and refining the nutrient tracking tool for all these years. So thank you to Mindy for sharing her NTT slides with me. So what is NTT? It's a free online field scale tool for estimating nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment losses from crop and pasture land. And it helps you run what if conservation planning scenarios on specific fields to compare your baseline water quality losses to reductions associated with conservation practices. And so it requires this before versus after scenario approach. And that, you know, has been exactly what Flo has been describing, is when you're comparing your costs and your benefits for production of your crops before soil health practices were adopted to after the soil health practices were adopted. So that's the partial budgeting analysis, honing in on exactly what's changed. It's somewhat akin to this environmental analysis. So that's kind of neat, right? Some background information behind the NTT tool is the APEX model. It uses a whole bunch of USDA and national data sets, and it was developed by the Texas Institute for Applied Environmental Research, TIAER, and NRCS in the past, and it's now in its 3rd generation in partnership with the USDA Office of Environmental Markets. So the first thing you do in NTT is you start by outlining your focus field. It's called the area of interest, AOI. And so you zoom into a map and you can click and you can draw the boundaries of your field. It's pretty fun. And you can do this field establishment many different ways, through GIS, through addresses. It's pretty cool and fun. Then it says, oh, we know something about your field with all of these built-in data sets, right? And so you get the opportunity to review what it knows in terms of the soil data and input available phosphorus or organic matter data if you have it available. And it's very forgiving. So if you don't have a lot of field level data, you don't have to enter it. Then you create both the baseline, which is, you know, in this case, right, in a normal this is where I'm going to start to lose people. I hope I don't. Baseline when it's a what if planning tool is what are you doing now? And the conservation scenarios are what are you thinking about doing, right? That's not how we used it. We used it to look retrospectively. So our baseline was what were you doing in the past before you adopted your soil health practices? And now that you're doing soil health, tell us about all those practices and tell us how you grew your crop under those practices, right? So a little bit of a difference. And then one crop at a time, it asks you to build in specific details about planting that crop. In this case, we start with the corn. If it's a corn-soybean rotation, you'll be entering all of this information from corn. Then you'll enter all of the information for soybeans under the baseline scenario. And then you'll do the same thing for the conservation scenario. If you're more complicated cropping system operation like in New York, you may have 5 crops to enter this detail in each time. And then for each of those major categories of planting, of fertilizer, you have additional web pages to enter in even more information. When did you apply the fertilizer? What type of fertilizer did you use? What was the rate of application? What was the method? If there was subsurface placement, how deep did it go? So again, opportunities to further refine the analysis. Then NTT asks for your structural conservation practices. What we said with our farmers, you can pick a field that's representative of all your best available soil health fields. Try to avoid ones that have the the structural practice on there, because we don't want to evaluate the benefit of the structural practice. We want to evaluate the benefit of the soil health practice. So if a farmer had to pick a field that did have a structural practice on it, we just asked that it had to be there in the past, in the before soil health years. So essentially, the delta, the change in environmental benefits would be attributed to the soil health practices. Finally, here we have the nutrient tracking tool results page. Oops. In this first column here, we see the baseline scenarios, and this, farmers' information is estimating that on average about 52.9, 53 pounds of nitrogen are lost per acre from this farm in the before soil health practice environment. But when you add in a split application, that nitrogen loss drops significantly to just 22 pounds per acre, or a 30% change, a 30% reduction. When you add in additional conservation practices, whose names I've forgotten right now, the change is even better. Losses of nitrogen are cut down to 19%, or a negative 33.5% change, a reduction in those losses by 33%. So you have phosphorus information, you have water flow information, sediment information, and there's some crop yield information as well. So going very quickly here, this is just the highlight to give you a sense of these tools if you've never seen them before. This is the web page for the Comet Farm tool, and on here you find all sorts of helpful things like this. Help at the front, at the top is a great place to click. Need help at the bottom is a very engaging. You can search keywords and you'll get prompted with articles that address your needs, and you can also directly email the tech support folks there. So a lot of great things on this main website. There is the website URL, and there's tons of videos that when you click on the help at the top right, you click on Comet Farm training videos, you'll get taken to a YouTube page where you can watch 3-minute to 36-minute videos. There's 15 PDF tutorials available, and there's that neat, engaging need help feature. Thank you so much to Haley Nagel, who is their education and outreach specialist, for sharing her slides that helped me prepare for this presentation. And thank you to Mark Easter, who has been terrific, helping us reviewing and troubleshooting and training us over the years. And Matt Sturmer was Haley's predecessor before, and we owe a lot of thanks to him as well. So if any of you are thinking of doing the water quality and the climate analyses that we did as well, all of these contacts that we've shared with you with their emails are at the ready to respond to you and be your partner in your next project. So please reach out to them. It's critical to have them on your team. About Comet Farm, it's a free web-based greenhouse gas inventory tool for land use designed for conservation scenario analysis. Again, it's a what-if scenario tool on fields to compare the current management greenhouse gas emissions to reductions associated with the conservation practices in future management scenarios. And it's built on fantastic models like the Descent dynamic model and lots of data sets listed here. So again, it starts out similarly. You have to find your field, and you can outline it similarly to the nutrient tracking tool, and find it other ways as well. You go through a series of web pages, and first is this historic management step where you answer questions about what was happening a long time ago, 1980, on this field. And then you build in, again, the similar information as to nutrient tracking tool, what was grown and how was it grown, all of these different categories, planting, fertilizer, tillage, etc. It has this neat drag and drop rotation builder feature, and that's really helpful because one major difference between Comet Farm and nutrient tracking tool is Comet Farm is asking for very specific information back to year 2000. So you're essentially asking, between 2000 and 2018, 2019, what were the crops grown in what kind of a rotation and how did things vary? And then what we did, of course, is our farmers were adopting the practices between 4 and 10 years ago. So we were also letting the tool know, well, you know, we're not going to use your what if conservation future management scenario the way the tool was built. We're going to let the tool know that already amazing good soil health practices have been implemented, and we're going to analyze the effects ourselves in Excel. And so that's what we're going to get to soon. So you're completing this 2000 to 2019 for the current management, right? So as soon as you're starting to populate the information, it'll show up here. And then the conservation practices, the soil health practices will also show up here. It's a drop-down experience, just like nutrient tracking tool. It's pretty fun too. This is the results table. They call it the graphical user interface, or the GUI table. And so, for example, you can see that on average, the baseline level of emissions before the conservation practices were about 88.9, so 90 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year in total greenhouse gas emissions were being emitted or lost from this analyzed field. When cover crops were introduced, that was cut practically in half, right? So it went from 89.9 down to 40.8 total tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. Or here's your delta, your change, negative 48.1, so about a 50% reduction in the total greenhouse gases. If you wanted to analyze by the component gases, you could see that, well, how kind of cool that this field was actually a net carbon sequester, because you've got negative 6 tons here. And that improved even more. And so where the big greenhouse gas losses were occurring were in the nitrous oxide emissions row right here, 95 cut down to 67, and that gives us the delta. Another thing to point out on this page is very important to our use of the tool, is that this button is export crop management data. That is what we use to get it into Excel for further analysis. And the other neat feature is this link to the GHG equivalencies calculator, which I'll show you a little bit later. So you can provide additional color to your analyses and not just talk about this wonderful 50% reduction story, but you can also translate what this loss of emissions translated into, what this reduction translating into in terms of number of cars taken off the road. So if Comet Farm is a little bit too data intensive for you and your farmer, there is Comet Planner, and that provides a very coarse county level estimate, but it's 4 clicks away to get your answer instead of, you know, what is about an hour and a half interview process. So when we started working, we had to figure out how to develop a questionnaire for our interviewers alongside this economics questionnaire. And we knew that so many of the questions for both of these tools were so similar. So we didn't want to bother the farmer with essentially 3 interviews. And so I endeavored to work with the developers and find out what are their data entry forms and created a combined form. So this is what, it's a 4-page or so Word document that Dr. Saleh and Mindy shared with me. It's nice and simple, straightforward way to collect data for the NTT tool. And so this might work for some of you, and if you're only focused on a water quality analysis. And this is the PDF-based form. I think it's like something like 13 to 16 pages, I think, for the Comet Cropland tool. And if you're focused on animal ag analysis, agroforestry, there are other versions of this PDF tool. And so it's a lot to take in, right? And that's why we created a combined Excel-based questionnaire. So here I go. I'm prompted to show you the 4 NTT Comet materials methods. All right, I'm gonna go find some of them. I think the first thing on my list is the Comet questionnaire. Okay, here we are in the combined Comet and NTT data entry portion of the Comet questionnaire. What you see immediately is there's a lot of yellow to fill out, right? This is like copying the format of Flo's tool. The yellow represents where data entry can occur. And the first thing you see is that there's years 2000 to 2018 that resembles the data requirements of Comet. But, and so if you didn't need to do Comet, you could get rid of all of that and just have rows for the number of crops in the before years to do your conservation scenario for nutrient tracking tool, and the same number of rows. So if it's a 2 rotation, it's a corn soybean rotation, you would have 2 rows for your before, and then you'd have 2 rows for your after soil health scenarios to build up a nutrient tracking tool version only for this. But right now, this is serving both tools. And just to give you a highlight of what precedes this, you know, this is where you could copy in your list of information that you collected ahead of time. So you're reminding yourself, oh, when did the soil health practices start and how many acres are they on? And this helps you remember, you know, there's a little scratch pad here. This is the overview questions. The font size is a little small. I'll try to get it bigger. Oh, a little bit too big. And these are questions asked for by both tools, and this is where you would put in some information. I think I made it even smaller. In the historical management section, this is only what Comet cares about, and these are drop-down lists right here and some definitions. Let's see. And then here's your Comet data entry form again. So here's a color scheme, some tips to tell you. Let me get down here. Yellow is a question asked for by both Comet and NTT, okay? Light blue is a question asked only by nutrient tracking tool. White, right here, is a question only asked by Comet. So that helps you know, which tool needs what information. And here's some additional tips right here. So just to give you an understanding of how all of this translates into the questions required and asked of you when you're in the tools, you know, first place, you'll talk to the, oh, for some reason I'm not sure why I'm not seeing my drop-down menus. This is odd. We'll fix this. I know it's working. I was just working on this, so I'm not sure why it's not responding to me, but all of these are drop-down. Oh, here we go. One's working. Maybe I'm asking it to respond too quickly. So here's where you choose your crops. And just like Flo showed you the back end, I want to quickly go to the back end to show you where the data is coming from. So for Comet, the crops are coming from right here. So these are the tab that shows you all the drop-down menus. And this is where you would go to modify this. Should you be working in a county where sugar beets are not grown, right? Tobacco, is that grown in your county? So this is where you would have to do the very hard and painful work of editing this, just like I did to create it. The drop-down menus that you might have seen in NTT and Comet are not kind in the sense that you can't just copy and paste them here. You have to literally put them up on your two screens and type. So that's what I had to do. That's what you're going to have to do. And I have instructions on how to alter drop-down menus. And Flo gave you a little brief primer on that. And here is the NTT version of the drop-down menus for this same county. And you see they're a little bit different, right? So when you're working with your farmer and the farmer's actually growing something a little bit different than what is available, or using a cover crop that's a little bit different than what is available, you have a couple of options. You can go ahead and find a drop-down menu option that is close enough, and then write a note to yourself saying, you know, they picked forage radish, but they really wanted oilseed radish as their cover crop, and make a note to yourself so that you, when you're in the tool, you can find the best available closest fit. Or you can go ahead and just override the drop-down menu here. So you could just say bananas, bananas, and that would override it. For some reason, it's not cooperating with me today. So this is very annoying. I practiced and everything. But that usually happens. You can override the tool, but then you probably don't want to, right? Because you have to jam in the farmer's response to what's available on the drop-down menus on the two tools. So you probably just want to make a note and figure it out and work with Mindy or Haley later. So let's see where I'm at here. The planting and harvesting is a common first set of questions. And so you'll have planting method options that drop down here, aerial seeding, etc. And is the options coming from nutrient tracking tool. You'll put in yields for over the years, end of crop yields, etc. Tillage. We had a discussion earlier about definitions. So here, let's see, is our modified definition of the tillage classes that one must select in Comet Farm tool. And we modified this table a little bit. Chris Reynolds and Emily Bruner modified it to better represent how farmers discuss these terms themselves. And better, I don't think we had to change the implements too much at all, but this section that has a lot of definitions associated with residue, they did feel they needed to modify it. So this is AFT's tweaking of the drop-down table, print it and share it with the farmer. And you can see the original, we retained that, and that's still available in the Comet Farm tool. This is the original. So not much data as you see as what Chris and Emily felt was needed to be fleshed out. So here we are in the tillage categories. NTT asks a very simple, is it no-till, was it high intensive tillage, or was it low reduced tillage? And here it goes into asking, well, what kind of equipment did you use? While this is the question that we just reviewed for Comet Farm, those tillage classifications. And so what you see here is in the before soil health years, farmers are going to have a lot of tillage going on. So we have provided at least 3 tillage operation columns. And if there were 4 or 5 or 6, all you have to do is just copy and paste these sections here and, you know, push the tables out. So you can accommodate that. Moving on to the nitrogen set of questions. Remember, Comet only cares about nitrogen, while water quality NTT cares about both NTT. So you'll see the questions change accordingly. And here's NTT's lists of commercial fertilizer configurations, and different fertilizer types and how much actual N was applied. So you may have to do some side calculations if your farmer's telling you what's on the bags versus how much N is actually in that mix of fertilizer. And we have some tips on how to do that. I'm sure all of you know how to do that. So again, there's 2 applications, there's 3 applications. If you need 4 and 5, copy and paste it. If there's manure involved, a whole bunch of manure questions, a lot having to do with nutrient tracking tool. If there's irrigation involved, liming involved, burning, both tools want to know this information. And for a lot of our responses, it was a quick no. So you can do a quick no and just say, it's not applicable. Here are the cover crop questions. And surprisingly, not only do the tools want to know about planting and cover crop type and planting methods and population plant, those are information, if you have it, it's nice for a nutrient tracking tool. And if you don't, it's not going to penalize you. But then if there's grazing involved, that's something that nutrient tracking tool asks. If there's tillage involved, if there's application of fertilizer or manure to the cover crop, there's opportunities to tell the tool that. And if the cover crops are irrigated, if they're limed, and if they're burned. And finally, we get to the structural practice question, and this only has to do with NTT. Comet does not care about structural practices. So if there's auto irrigation or fertigation, that's an almond or a tree crop term. If there's tile drained on this field, you're analyzing wetlands, ponds, grass buffers, grass waterways, contour buffers, etc. So that is a very quick overview of the questionnaire. I wonder how I'm doing on time. Let's see. 12:10. Oh, I think I'm 12:50, 12:10. Oh, I think I have to.
You've got about
20 minutes.
Well, 17 minutes.
17 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good. I have 15 minutes according to my schedule of things to talk about. Or maybe 20 minutes. Okay, so shifting gears now, those tips that I told you about to tweak your drop-down menus. So if you're not familiar with this, many of you probably already are great in Excel. This is just a tip document for how to change your drop-down lists, and it's very explicit. You know, click on the cell where you want the drop-down to appear, click on the data button. You actually saw Flo do this before. Click on the data validation and make sure the allow section has list, the data should be grayed out, and then you tell it to get to your new source. I'm very nervous to try to show this to you since this was giving me a little bit of a heartache before. Let's see if I can do this demonstration now. Let's see. So data, there we go. And the data validation tool is right there. And so we'll click on that. And it's allow and list, correct? Data is grayed out. And here is where it's telling me this crop list is from. So I just click on that. It takes me right to it. And I say, oh, well, my neck of the woods, whoops, is planting bananas. Oh. Let's see, I guess it doesn't want me to do that. Close. I'm going to just go here. Oh, I'm just really not doing a good job here. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Oh. Okay, I'm just going to try to.
Hit cancel, Michelle, and it won't change anything.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to let it know that in my neck of the woods, we actually plant bananas. And so I want to tell it to include the new crop, and it's going to take me there. And I'm going to say from sugar beets all the way to bananas, please. Hit enter and then hit OK. And hopefully Sugar beets all the way to bananas. Woohoo! So that is a way to modify the tool. All right, shifting gears now, I want to tell you about how to use Excel to analyze it if you're working with soil health successful farmers, okay? So here's just a little intro. I'm not going to go into this document in detail, but it is a very detailed document. So just given that we interviewed soil health successful farmers and we want to know what the climate benefits are of that investment in soil health, we use Comet Farm differently than the standard what if scenario. We did not ask, what if the farmer adopts a new practice in the future? Nor did we ask, what if the farmer continues adoption of his or her suite of soil health practices? Instead, we asked, what is the % reduction in climate emissions from this X acre field attributable to the soil health practices? So to do that, we had to proceed with, we entered in all the information from 2000 to 2018 or 2000, yeah, it was 2018 or 19. And then we had to create a dummy future scenario set of data to just get the tool to let us export out the information of the current management system into Excel. So this document provides you with all you need to know about creating that dummy, what we call a dummy or just a fake future scenario, step-by-step instructions to set up a default future scenario in order to export Comet Farm results to Excel for analysis via our approach, okay? And then the only other thing to point out in this, so there's nice screenshots to help walk you through it, a lot of other steps, and here's tips on how to obtain the CAR statistic that I mentioned, and I'll show you a little bit more about it. There's some tips that I learned that I had to write down and I wanted to share with all of you about the tools. And then finally, just to help give you an understanding of what we're doing and saying here is, you know, farmers are on a soil health journey, right? They don't necessarily adopt all these conservation practices all at once. So working with Matt Sturmer of Colorado State University, we laid out for him, our authors and I and Matt Sturmer had conversations together to say, well, if this Eric Niemeyer farmer in Ohio started no-till in 2011, nutrient management also in 2011, and cover crops in 2014, how can we compare what are his before soil health years to his current after soil health years? And so here is the recommendation from Matt saying that the 8 years from 2003 to 2010 can be our before years, and we can say that his 2011 to 2018 timeframe, those 8 years, are his after soil health practice adoption years. So if we can find the same number of years to compare to in Excel, we can do the analysis in Excel. Dan Lane, we just talked about at length, started no-till in 2010, did nutrient management in 2012. Matt Sturmer's recommendation is, well, from 2010 to 2018 time period, those 9 years are your after soil health practice adoption. That's your current management. Compare those to the previous 9 years, 2001 to 2009. So hopefully this is all interesting and useful to you. Here we are in our Excel, and this is the last document for me to show in this session. Keeping track of time here. Okay. So after using all those tips, you've now been able to export your data to Excel, and you're going to get something like this Excel document of data. And what you need to know, the first two things you need to know is only use the information labeled current in the time frame column A. You'll have other sections of this Excel file labeled future. And you want to ignore those because that is not how we are using Comet Farm in this retrospective analysis. So only use the current time frame of data, only those rows. The other thing you want to know is do not use anything other than the greenhouse gas balance column, this total column in AK, column AK. There's going to be all this, I'm going to show you now, all this wonderful information about the components of these greenhouse gases, burning N2O, rice cultivation, burning CO, urea CO2, biomass, carbon here. All of those are the component parts. And we don't want to analyze the component parts. We want to analyze the total greenhouse gas losses. Okay, so this only applies to those things. Next thing to know is the percent change formula, which is written down in red here. So we're trying to estimate the percent reduction in total greenhouse gases. Just a sec, getting this out of my way so I can read it. Attributable to soil health practices by comparing the average emissions from the before soil health years, that's the old value, to the emissions from the years after the soil health practices were adopted, the new value. Okay, so in in this AFT example, in 2013, this farmer switched from intensive till to reduced till for soybeans and added cover crops. The emissions from 2013 to 2018, those 6 years, are considered attributable to these soil health practices and will be compared to the emissions from the previous 6 years, 2007 to 2012. So the color key here I've adapted is that green is showing us the 6 before soil health years and blue is showing us the 6 after soil health years, okay? So you do your trusty rusty little average formula here. Average the values right here, these 6 years of green values, and the interpretation is the average greenhouse gas emissions from the years before soil health was 6 tons CO2 equivalent per year. Let's compare that to the new values, and it's indicating that the new values were about -8 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. What is that indicating? The negative? That carbon sequestration is occurring. And maybe I want to just show you what's on the left here. So, you know, this is the information coming out of Comet Farm. It's a corn soybean rotation. Here are the years. It was intensive tillage before. Recall that 2013, they changed to reduced tillage. They didn't have any changes in fertilization. Their yields were about the same, but in 2013, they added this annual rye legume radish cover crop, or at least this was the cover crop choice that was closest to what the farmer was actually doing. All right, moving back into this. So now we move back into the part of the equation, which is new minus old. So there you go, -14. What does that say? The interpretation is that there was a there was a 14-ton decrease in greenhouse gases thanks to the soil health practices. And you can see there's some language to the left, to the right of this, and we're gonna come back to that in just a bit. Let's finish our formula. We continue moving our formula down, divide by the old value gives us -2.3, multiply by 100 gives us -234. So the interpretation is that the soil health practices from 2013 to 2018 resulted in a 235% decrease in the greenhouse gas emissions from this field compared to the emissions on the field from the previous 6 years, 2007 to 2012. And this is just another reminder that CSU underscores the importance of not using the GHG balance, anything other than the GHG balance values, okay? Don't try to use the soil carbon analysis. Wrapping up here, so you can take this 14-ton decrease in greenhouse gases thanks to the soil health practices, and using this link below, get to the EPA CARS equivalent calculator website. And you saw that on the GUI table screenshot that I showed you. You can find it there and you can find it here. And you would scroll down and then you input that information into that greenhouse gas equivalency section. And it's pretty cool and fun and easy. Here we are. We have emissions data. Click on that. I guess it's already clicked. That's right.
Hey, Michelle,
then,
just
yes.
so you know that you have 5 minutes left.
Very good. I'm going to be early. And then it calculates, and there's 3 vehicles. So 14 tons of GHGs reduced in carbon dioxide equivalent per year metrics units translates roughly into taking 3 passenger vehicles off the road for 1 year, or about 35,000 miles, passenger miles driven. So neat ways to further provide color to your analysis. I think that was it. so we can start Q&A early on these environmental methods or on any other methods.
Okay, that sounds great. Looks like, Michelle, we just right now only have one question on the environmental methods, but if people have other questions just in general, go ahead and enter them in the Q&A. Do you see
Okay.
the question, Michelle?
I'm trying to get to them. Let's see. Oh, is it because I'm sharing that is making it difficult for me to see the questions? Okay, now I've got it. Does the N2O assessment only look at edge of field, or does it also look to capture downstream conversion of nitrates where most of the conversion actually occurs? Alec Eccles, this is definitely not a question to ask me, but a question to ask both of the tool developers, or you may find it in those FAQ and user documents as well. So I'm not sure which tool your edge of field indicates that your question is looking at NTT perhaps, but definitely not something for me to answer. Olga, Olga, you had a question, and oh, here it is. Where does the environmental analysis plug into the economic analysis and the case studies? Thank you for that question. So we decided that, Flo's initial two, her initial two case studies focused solely on the economics, and we wanted to do some kind of environmental analysis. And because this was a retrospective analysis and we weren't able to be there, 4 to 10 years ago to take soil tests to actually track the farmers' changes in soil benefits, and we created some thoughts in our minds of maybe if we could ask the farmer to take soil tests of their fields now where they have invested all those soil health practices, and then find a field where they haven't, or ask a neighbor to take a test. We came up with all sorts of things, and nothing seemed to really resonate with us and our farmers, and so we determined to use these modeled tools to provide an environmental analysis. And so what I was just going to show was going back, let's see if I can squeeze under here, and there we go. So this is Jay Swede's case study from New York. All of our case studies include the water quality and the climate analyses in the final paragraph, or the second to the final paragraph of their case studies. And so we really, after all of that blood, sweat, and tears, to put the farmer through the 1.5 hour nutrient tracking tool and Comet Farm tool combined interview, for our team to go back in and enter the data into both of those tools, and to do the additional analyses, we resorted to summarizing the data in this one paragraph. So to estimate the water quality and climate benefits experience on one of Jay's 25-acre fields, USDA's nutrient tracking tool was used, and found that Jay's use of strip till, cover crops, and nutrient management reduced NP and sediment losses by 40, 92, and 96% respectively. On the same field, USDA's Comet Farm tool estimates that Jay's soil health practices resulted in a 560% reduction in total greenhouse gas emissions, which corresponds to taking 3 cars off of the road. So this is the extent to which the environmental analyses are featured in these 2-page case studies. Let's see. Mary Fales asks, once you get the greenhouse gas results from Comet Farm, would it be appropriate to take the GHG emissions reductions and carry that forward as a future prediction, considering the farmer continues the same practices? Yes, I think so. I think we didn't do that. It was a retrospective analysis. We were already complicating our use of the tool to do the retrospective analysis. We didn't want to add in, and as you can see, there's hardly any space to get it in anyway, so we didn't add in the additional commentary that we could have about future continued use. We're in the process of doing our predictive assessments with 2 farmers each in these locations, as we've hinted. And we will be using Comet Farm and NTT in the way they were built as what-if scenario tools. And so those are private documents. They're not going to be shared with the world. They're going to be one-on-one between our authors and the farmers. Those will provide the estimate. If you continue using these into the future, here are your water quality and climate benefits. Michelle with an L. 1L, how do you deal with the long history required if the farmer is renting land and does not have the history? That was definitely a challenge for many of our, some of our authors. And so you want to be picking of the area of, if it's not a whole farm economic analysis, right? Like Eric Niemeyer of Ohio adopted all the practices on the entire operation, while other farmers adopted them on the majority on a subset of acres, and we did our economic analysis on that subset of acres. You want to find a focus field on that subset of acres that's best representative of the use of all of those practices. And what we found is that the majority of the farmers adopted those practices the longest on the land they own. So they're not going to choose a focus field on land they rent. Some farmers, they adopted equally on both owned and rented land. They just had a very terrific relationship with their landowner that they felt comfortable doing that. Arjun asks, is there a plan to add the water quality benefits of reducing pesticide use to the NTT model? Again, that is not a question for me, but for Dr. Saleh and for Mindy. Thank you.